So let's all play a game now.
I love that.
Did that get you excited? There is no doubt that the prospect and rewards of gaming light a spark for most of us. Ashlyn Sparrow, our next presenter, beautiful, in beautiful presentation mode, can speak to that phenomenon. She's the assistant director of the Weston Game Design Lab at the University of Chicago. Her session will explore the creation of educational games, drawing from a range of behavioral theories and game design practices that can help increase knowledge or produce an attitudinal shift in players. Ashlyn will introduce you to game design principles that can be applied to scientific visualization. I am delighted, incredibly delighted to turn things over to her now.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Just want to make sure I'm doing this right. All right. Oh, no, don't look at all that. Look at this. Hello. Can you all see this? Just give me a little thumbs up. Perfect. Hello, all. I'm very excited to talk to you all about games. Again, my name is Ashlyn Sparrow. My background is actually, I do graphic design, but I am not a trained medical illustrator at all. In fact, my graphic design work was a hobby of mine, and it just happens to be in my everyday life now. But my training is actually in game design and experience design. And I've been playing games for an incredibly long period of time. I could say officially now that I have about 20 years of just game playing under my belt. And what I find interesting about games is that they are this new kind of cultural phenomenon, the way that people are starting to kind of understand the world that we live in and the systems that they interact with, right? If people always ask, oh, can I restart this? Or, I really wish I could level up in that. And so I'm really interested in thinking about ways that game design can be used for social impact and how you might be able to visualize that either through game mechanics or also through the artwork. That being said, please do just cut me off if I'm going too long. I can talk about games forever. Do not hesitate to just be like, shh, 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 stop, right? But I digress. Let us go ahead and get into it. I always like to start my talks off with talking about games specifically. And the first question I always have to go and answer is, but why games? Like, why? That is a fantastic question. So as I mentioned before, games are this new kind of a new meaning in terms of like films and books and television. They're one of the newer cultural phenomenons that are kind of taking over the world. We know that from the Pew Research Institute that 97% of young people are playing games. I do not know what those other like 3% are doing. Maybe I really don't know. We don't need to worry about them. They're fine. But how might we actually start using this form as a means to understand what's going on in society? Because capitalism runs everything that we do. I will say that it's a $43 billion industry and it's continuing to make money. The fact that we're in, this kind of COVID-19 period, one of the few industries that hasn't actually stopped is actually games, right? It's one of those things that can actually be done separately. And it's also a thing that gets people to, stay at home, but still entertain themselves while other people cannot necessarily interact with each other like the game industry. Some fun facts for you. Grand Theft Auto 5, when it first came out, this was like 2013, it made $1 billion in 3 days. So it's one of the fastest selling video games of all times. Yeah, I know, it's kind of wild. Pokemon Go, another maybe favorite of some people here. When it first released, it got about 550 million downloads in the first week or so. So people are just playing these games. But we're also moving into what are called like these transmedia experiences. Another popular game, Fortnite, played by millions, maybe played by some of your students, children, nephews, nieces. They actually hold a concert. They held a concert in Fortnite, having DJs such as Marshmello perform, and it had 2 million people a part of the experience, right? So it's kind of interesting. League of Legends, another huge popular esports game, has all these characters that you can play as, but what's interesting, and they've always been doing this, but it's interesting about what's happening now. But did you know that there's like a K-pop band that came out of League of Legends? Like a Korean pop group emerged from the characters in this game, and they've released a new album, they released a new single, right? They've gone on tours and they've opened up new events. So we're in this mode where games are starting to bleed into our everyday lived experiences in ways that we hadn't predicted before, right? And these characters are voiced by real people, real Korean pop stars, real American pop stars working together to build a larger experience. So that's why I say, why games? Games are this just really interesting phenomenon that can allow us to maybe start influencing behaviors. So another question I constantly get is like, but Ashlyn, what is a game? That is also a fantastic but contentious question in the game industry. I am the type of person who doesn't like to gatekeep. I've been kept so many times in my life. I want everyone to love a game. But I think if you're interested in using games as a medium, it's important to kind of get an understanding of how other people view games, but how we might actually be able to move the industry forward. So I like to use this definition by Jasper Yules and from his book Half-Life. And here are some of the elements of a game. They have fixed rules, right? It's very clear when you play a game what the rules of the game are, and you agree to them before you play them. They have variable and quantifiable outcomes. It's clear when someone wins, when someone loses, why something has happened in that game because someone has, affected a system in some way. There's a valorization of outcomes, right? So people, depending on the outcomes, it's either good or bad, sad or frustrating. People make meaning of those outcomes. Players will always exert efforts on the game system. People are always attached to the outcomes of the game itself, right? Because, again, people are either happy or sad that their team, that they won their game or lost their games. But this is the interesting point. The consequences of that experience are negotiable, right? So some people play games just for fun. Some people play it for, their actual jobs, like, I don't know, athletes, whatever they do, right? And then some people, like, you can earn money from that, right? What does a poker game look like that has lots of consequences attached to it? But what I specifically like about these definitions is that they can actually be applied maybe to our everyday lives, right? If we think about the systems of care that we interact with, they have fixed rules. Insurance has rules, right? Those rules are really hard to understand, but there are rules there, right? Depending on the outcome that the person, the user of that experience goes through, they might be able to get an insurance claim, they might not be able to, right? In terms of school, they might be able to earn a better grade or not. And the consequences are negotiable. For some people, completing school is, the thing that they want to do. For some people, it's neither here nor there. But society has kind of set these rules. And what I want us to start doing as designers is to think about how might we look at the systems that our players, right? People in their everyday lives interact with, and how do they actually map onto games? And how might we actually start explaining some of the rules that they interact with through the language of a game, which is very clear to people, right? So then that means that we can actually start thinking about things like gentrification, right? And the health disparities that come from gentrification, if we could start illuminating what some of those rules are at play, how racism and discrimination actually work, right? These are all intentionally designed systems, right? But but a game is, all designers know that they're intentionally designing something for a player, but there's something weird when it comes to politicians, sometimes for medical professionals, that they forget that they're intentionally designing something for another person. And so kind of using that language of games, using that language of design, we can bring back and remind people, hey, you're designing something for a person to interact with, right? So how might we also use play and game design to influence our social cultural systems? Those are the things that we're really interested in at the Weston Game Lab. And we're really interested in like what I'll call game design thinking, right? I think anyone who does design thinking, right? Whether you're a fashion designer, interior designer, service designer, you all do design thinking. And so here, when it comes to game design, there's so many different elements to a game. There's the aesthetics, the mechanics, or those are the actions that a player can take within a game, the dynamics, the way that those actions that those players take interact with one another to create dynamic and new systems. There are narratives in games, whether those are authored narratives, those are written and designed by the design team, or emergent narratives, where sometimes the actions a player takes in a game creates its own interesting form of narratives. Games also create these communities, right? So anytime you play a game, people have joined forums online. There are now wiki articles dedicated to games. And so how might we think about the experience that we are designing? How does that link to a community? And how does that link to maybe an online community, or actually maybe an in-person community where people come together and play games? The platform is also really important to think about, right? So, games are in multiple media forms, right? We have video games, we have mobile games, right? We also have card games and board games. The platform specificity actually kind of matters because different people like different types of experiences. So how might we actually also think about what are people's preferred methods of understanding information? Visually, I think it's all important, but does it matter if a person reads a comic versus playing a game versus watching a video, right? What will actually help get them to understand this information in a more effective way? And I don't care what Twitter has to say. They're always like, games aren't all political. No. All games, everything is political. And there are always social, cultural, political implications to the work that it is that you do. And so how might games actually start to uncover those implicit rules that no one really talks about, but games are really good at taking the implicit and making them explicit. Okay. All right. Some other things about games. When we talk about games, we also talk about what are known as the affordances of the medium and the game space. So these are the things that games are really good at doing that makes it different from any form of medium, right? So unlike, let's say, television and comic books, games are really good at providing player agency, right? Games only move forward if a player exerts an effort. If a player doesn't exert effort, but something is still happening in the background, that's a simulation, which is excellent and good for us to know. But when it comes to games, players can interact with that simulation. Players can actually exert effort on it, and they can kind of learn and glean information from themselves. Games are also really good at trial and error, right? When you think of a test that you complete in school, you do the test, you either pass or you fail, and that's kind of it. But games are one of the only few mediums where you can play it, and if you fail, that game over screen is really to tell you that you messed up in some way. You need to figure out a new strategy, and then you should just try it again, right? And you can try it again over and over and over again for as long as you need until you gain a level of mastery to actually get over the level. So games also have within them, embedded within them, these kind of assessments to them, right? So in terms of Mario, right, when you learn to jump for the first time, right, you hit the block. Oh, great. So when you jump, you can hit the block. Cool. What can you also do when it comes to jumping? There's a little space that Mario has to jump over. If you fall through the crack, that's totally fine. You start back from the level again, but now you might have learned, maybe I need to figure out a better way to jump. Do I need to run and jump? Do I need to keep holding the jump button, right? You can just keep trying and you can learn from that experience, which then also means that games become this safe space for failure, right? Where again, when I think of tests or like our judicial system or sometimes our healthcare system, like they are not designed so that if people make a mistake, that there's a way to kind of go back and say, hey, you made a mistake, let's correct this, right? People are kind of left on their own to just kind of flounder. So how might games kind of not necessarily sometimes hold people's hands, but also just kind of guide them along through the experience, let them know what it is that they should be looking at, looking towards, what they should be doing next, etc. And then the last one is that games are really good for depicting larger systems, right? I have
Yes, yes.
Hello? Oh, sorry. So when it comes to, games, I have built universes, I have built cities, and I understand how zoning works because I played played SimCity, and understand how you might build industry around that. But I am not a city planner. I will probably never be a city planner. I will probably always be a game designer, but games can actually help get people to understand those systems. And that's amazing, right? A game would help people really understand how maybe COVID-19 spreads, right? Because it's really hard for people to grasp this abstract thing. Should I wear a mask? Should I wash my hands? You should, absolutely. But for some people, it's like really hard to understand how these little tiny viruses are spreading so rapidly, or maybe, how asymptomatic people work, right? A game would be really good at depicting that. So one other thing that we talk about in games is this idea of procedural rhetoric. So like rhetoric, where you have a message that you're trying to send to your audience. When we talk about procedural rhetoric, and this is coming from Ian Bogost, who's a game theorist at Georgia Tech, he talks about how games are all procedural, right? They're rule-based. And because they're rule-based, they make meaning through the rules that have been created, right? So for instance, I'll use a really popular example of a game, Call of Duty. Most people have heard of it. It's a first-person shooter. You're in the military, and you do exactly what the game sounds like in the military. You shoot, you run, you duck, you throw grenades, right? But if we talk about the procedural rhetoric, the rules of the game means that you shoot, you duck, you jump, you throw grenades. But it means that the game world is hyper-violent. It means that there are no other things that you can do in that game world. You can never de-escalate a situation, right? You can never have conversation with the people who might live in a town that you occupy, right? You can't do any of those things. And what that means, right, is that there's an interesting rhetoric that game, those procedures and those rules are giving off. So how might we, as we continue to design these game experiences, specifically for social impact and attitude and behavior change, how might we actually think about the rules that we're setting up, whether that's mechanically or visually, right? If you have characters in a game that's all white, what does it say when you have young people of color who play your game? What does it say when those young people of color play your game and certain characters cannot actually take actions in a particular game? And I wonder if I have, I don't have that example, but one example I'll actually bring up. Oh, actually, let me go back. I can do this. Wait a minute. Grand Theft Auto. I'm gonna bring this up really quickly. So in Grand Theft Auto, there are these things called mini games, and a mini game is just a smaller game contained within a larger game. And so in this game, you can play tennis. Fantastic mini game. And so you have your three characters here. This guy's name is Michael. Can you see my arrow circling around this guy? Perfect. So this guy's name is Michael. He's super rich. He in the back has his house. He has a tennis court, right? Doing big things. They're all criminals, by the way. So, don't get it twisted. This man's name is Franklin. He is poor. He lives in the projects. And this man here is named Trevor. He's also poor. He lives in a trailer park. So these two come from a low socioeconomic standing. Now in this game, you can play tennis, and it turns out that Michael and Trevor can play tennis in this game, and Franklin cannot. So this is interesting. This is like, okay. So when I told you that games have narratives attached to them, right? There's no narrative reason why Michael and Trevor know how to play tennis, but Franklin does not. There's no narrative explanation for it. I would have accepted that if that was the case. There's no socioeconomic reasoning behind it, right? Because Michael is rich, Trevor is poor. The only thing that I can deduce right now is actually it's due to race, right? Like white people play tennis, Black people don't play tennis. But that's a little weird, right? Because if we think about the real world, we've got Serena, Williams, Venus Williams. We also got Naomi, I forget her last name, from Japan, right? We've got women of color and people of color playing tennis. This seems like a really weird form of procedural rhetoric for this game to have, right? And so those are the things that we're constantly thinking about as we design games for social impact. And then the last thing I'll say before I show some examples of these games is the notion of chocolate-covered broccoli. Now, doesn't that sound disgusting? I see some of your faces. You're like, oh my God, that's so gross. Exactly, okay? No, like it's a bad idea to put chocolate over broccoli. If you like it, I'm not here to like hate on your taste buds. That's great. But generally the idea is not a good one, right? And so this represents the idea of educational games, where usually when people think of them, they're like, oh, that's like you're trying to teach me something, right? It's so healthy, it's so delicious, right? It's so not delicious, right? That's the broccoli. And then people have this idea of like, but what if I put chocolate over it, which is let's create a game to like stuff that educational content into a person's brain, it'll be fantastic. It won't be. It'll be chocolate covered broccoli. And so we need to actually think about what's known as embedded design. And embedded design is this idea of what happens if you're creating a game for serious pro-social purposes. It will be more effective if you're actually less overt and less obvious about what your message is. Actually allow the player to come to their own conclusion about the message at hand, right? And so this is something that is, because I work with high school teachers, I work, with faculty and medical professionals, and it's this moment where you actually have to kind of give up a little bit of your power, a little bit of your control over a situation to the player, right? And let them come to their own conclusions and then have conversations about it, right? And it actually, it works out much better for you. And I'll give you an example of a game that I worked on when I ran a different game lab, the Game Changer Chicago Design Lab. I'm hoping that one of my medical illustrators that I work with, Quinn Burrell, is on this call. I really hope she is, because this is her artwork. I'm about to show it off. At this game lab, we created this game called Smokestacks. It is a game to try and teach young people about the health risks of smoking cigarettes and just tobacco in general, right? Because there's cigarettes, there's hookah, there's all these other things. And so, most people know like you shouldn't smoke, just like most people know that you should exercise, that most people know that you should recycle. But it's hard to change your behavior unless you kind of have an experience around this. Okay. So being the crazy game designers we are, also knowing the principle of embedded design, we thought, well, what if we, again, gave a player agency, gave them a system that they could interact with that they would never be able to experience? What would it look like if players were tobacco companies and they're supposed to get as many people hooked on tobacco as possible and market directly to these customers? That's very weird, like premise, right? Most health teachers we worked with are like, whoa, that's really weird. That's uncomfortable. Exactly. But it becomes less obvious about what it is that we're doing, right? It means that the players have to actually understand how to market their products effectively, how to go out and change their strategies if legislation in the game changes, and try and get the most money possible. And then how do we visualize that? How do we make this fun? Well, we need to have different, we researched a bunch of different advertisements from tobacco companies. And we were able to deduce that some of them have like a more American patriotic aspect. Some are really cool or rebellious. And so, we had our medical illustrator go out and look at these images and then create cards that would represent that, while not necessarily mapping on directly to the exact, tobacco brand. We looked at all the different types of tobacco products that are out there, right? We have cigarettes, light cigarettes, e-cigarettes, hookah. And then we also had to look at how you would actually go about marketing these things to people. There's direct mail, there's magazines, right? There's the internet, all these different things. And so then players would have to buy their advertisements using their money, collect customers, and for every customer that they would gain, they would keep generating money from them throughout the entirety of the game. Excellent. But a twist in the game, we created a mechanism to have people lose customers to tobacco-related illnesses, which then meant that their customers would disappear. And because of this mechanism, what players ended up doing was just continuing saying, okay, our customers are gone, doesn't matter. We now need to get more customers. There are no orange customers on the board. We now need to switch to blue. We need to switch our marketing strategy. The great thing about that is exactly how tobacco companies operate, right? So we were able to map on the procedures and the rules and the rhetoric of what tobacco companies do to the game that we were creating, and then also make sure that it's accurate in terms of what people would see in the real world, right? And so this is the cool thing about games and how you're able to actually get people to interact with those real systems. A couple of other examples of some projects that we've worked on here at the Weston Game Lab is this thing called an alternate reality game. So I actually talk a little bit about the Terrarium project. And so this is actually one of the few live action games that we've produced. It's known as an alternate reality game. And essentially what those are, here's like a quick summary of them. They're these forms of transmedia experiences. And that means is that they're telling a story not using just one medium, but there are multiple ways that the story unfolds. You might have, text on a poster or a phone call, or there might be scavenger hunts around a specific location. You might get emails from certain characters, puzzles that a person interacts with to understand how the game actually works. They're networked in the sense that people are working together to uncover this larger mystery. They're participatory, so that also means that people are generating a lot of their own content, which then allows the design team to take that and run with it. And one of the most important things about these games is that you never ever tell your players that this is a game, even though it very much is a game, but you never say like, hey, you all are playing a game. And so what's cool about this is this allowed us to create a game focused around climate change. And we created this game in 2019 for the incoming class during orientation. Because what we wanted people to start doing is thinking about climate change more as an interdisciplinary problem. People are constantly thinking like, oh, the scientists will take care of that, right? I'm just an artist, what can I do? But how can we actually get scientists and artists, right? And medical illustrators are a perfect example of like a blending of these two, how we might get people to start speculating and thinking about the future of the world that we live in and what they can do to make change. We also work with a bunch of undergraduate and graduate students. I always want to just show off my students. Oh, come through. Oh no, where did they go? Come back. It's fine. I'm probably over time anyway. Oh, there they are. Hello. So, this is a large interdisciplinary project because interdisciplinary problems require interdisciplinary solutions. And so, we had students and also faculty here at UChicago work together to create quests that allowed people to speculate about their future, speculate about society. So we thought, well, what happens if you live on the coast of the United States and all of the glaciers melt, right? That means your sea level is going to rise. There's a high probability that certain cities are going to be underwater. Reimagine what that world would look like. How would society thrive through that, right? And so here we're playing around not only with the actual science where people had to go and research what what their cities would look like or how the climate would change, but also imagine how society could actually keep moving forward. How might we use artwork to do that? How might we also have people play through games and models? We actually had a geologist, David Archer here at UChicago. He has these models on his website. And so like, how can we gamify these models? How can we gamify these graphs of CO2 rising And what would that mean for our world? So players could actually go and look at these models, interact with them, see what these numbers are, and get information about it and do the research. And that would feed into some other games that people would play about just simply like taking care of a plant. And what happens if you're trying to take care of a tropical plant, but now it's a little too hot? How do you deal with that? Right? And so these are all the different ways that we're using art and games to really get people to think more critically about these kind of scientific health related problems. Yes.
I am going to take you at your offer.
Yes.
But can you and I go out for a drink now? Because I have a billion questions.
Please. Everything has been rough.
But I would really like to hear you talk about open adventure games where you choose your own adventure. That's something that our team has specialized in, and how you make the implicit explicit. So I don't know, we're kind of out of time. Do you want to say something about either of those things quickly?
Yeah, so it always happens through iteration. Right. And so because the team is interdisciplinary, it requires a lot of time for us to have these conversations. Not many times are game designers and medical illustrators and scientists all working together on a problem, a larger scale problem. And it requires us to build a new language. So it just takes time. A lot of these games that I've been working on have taken somewhere between a year, 2 years to manifest themselves, because it requires us to just even get on the same page about what it is that we're even talking about, right? So it's a lot of sharing notes with one another. If game designers are referencing a specific game, we'll have play sessions where the researchers will play that game, or we'll show images of those games so that people can understand what we're talking about. Game designers will read the research papers and articles. We'll have these larger design meetings, and actually I'm currently in the space. I can actually even stop sharing my screen. But we'll have like larger meetings where people can write notes on the whiteboard, right? And just even come together and just say, okay, this is what I think the experience should be. And then it's iterating and testing quickly with our audience, because we're creating something new.
Yeah, this has just been so fascinating, and we'll have to follow your career and what you're doing at the lab, and
follow Quinn Durrell. She's on the call. Yes, Quinn.
Quinn, beautiful artwork. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.